Today, I'd like to share with you a summary of a remarkable book called Power versus Force by Dr. David R. Hawkins. This book explores human consciousness, the nature of power, and how individuals and societies operate at various levels of awareness. It blends philosophy, psychology, and spirituality to offer a new way of understanding human behavior, motivation, and truth. At its core, Power versus Force introduces us to the idea that there are two distinct types of energy at play in the world: power and force. Power, as Hawkins explains, is grounded in truth, integrity, and harmony, while force is associated with control, coercion, and manipulation. These two energies define how we interact with the world and determine the outcomes of our lives. Let me walk you through some of the key concepts from this book, starting with Hawkins' exploration of consciousness. The first important point is understanding the levels of consciousness. A central idea in Power versus Force is the concept of a map of consciousness, which Hawkins developed to categorize and measure human consciousness on a scale from 0 to 1,000. Each level of consciousness represents a specific worldview, emotional state, and way of being in the world. At the lower end of the spectrum are the lower vibrations, which include shame, guilt, apathy, fear, anger, and pride. These are feelings that weaken us and bring us into states of distress or victimhood. At these levels, people often act from a place of force, such as manipulating, blaming, and struggling against the world in an attempt to control others or their environment. These levels of consciousness are dominated by ego and fear. As we rise higher up the scale, we begin to encounter levels like courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, and reason. These are states where people begin to transcend the need for control. They operate from a place of openness and strength, and they start relying on inner power rather than external force. The highest levels on Hawkins' scale are love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. Here, individuals are deeply aligned with truth, compassion, and unity. They act from a place of inner power where they effortlessly influence the world around them without force or manipulation. It is in these states that one truly embodies what Hawkins calls power. Now let's dive into the difference between power and force. So, what exactly is the difference between power and force? Force is the energy of struggle. It's rooted in control, opposition, and domination. When we act from force, we try to push against the world to make things happen. It's the energy of the ego, of fear, and of separation. People who use force rely on their position, authority, or physical might to get what they want. However, force is unsustainable. It requires constant effort, and it inevitably leads to resistance, conflict, and suffering. Power, on the other hand, is effortless. It flows from a deep connection to truth, love, and integrity. Power is about influence rather than control. It does not impose or coerce. Instead, it draws people in through its inherent strength and magnetism. Power aligns with the natural order of things, and because of this, it lasts. Where force depletes energy, power is self-reinforcing and creative. Let's consider an example. Think of historical figures like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. These leaders were embodiments of power. They didn't need to use force or violence to achieve their goals. Instead, they operated from a place of truth and justice, and their movements inspired millions. Forceful regimes have come and gone, but the power of their message endures. This contrast between power and force is critical for understanding why certain individuals and societies thrive, while others struggle. Power, as Hawkins explains, is aligned with the higher levels of consciousness, while force is aligned with the lower. Part 3. The calibration of truth. Muscle testing and kinesiology. One of the most intriguing aspects of power versus force is Hawkins's use of applied kinesiology, or muscle testing, to calibrate levels of truth. Hawkins proposes that the human body can be used as a kind of biofeedback mechanism to detect truth and falsehood. According to his research, when we are presented with something truthful or aligned with higher consciousness, our muscles strengthen. Conversely, when we are presented with something false, our muscles weaken. This concept is fascinating because it suggests that truth is not just a subjective experience, but something that can be measured. Hawkins uses this technique to calibrate everything from political ideologies to spiritual teachers to historical events. For example, he argues that figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna calibrate at the highest levels of consciousness, near 1,000, while destructive ideologies and movements calibrate much lower on the scale. While some may be skeptical of the use of muscle testing as a scientific tool, the broader point that Hawkins is making is about the innate human capacity to sense truth. He argues that we all have an intuitive understanding of what is true and what is not, but our connection to that truth can become clouded by lower states of consciousness, such as fear, greed, or hatred. 4. The role of ego and the path to higher consciousness. A significant portion of Power versus Force is devoted to exploring the role of the ego in human life. According to Hawkins, the ego is the part of us that operates from force. It is the voice of separation, fear, and competition. The ego is constantly trying to control the external world, protect itself, and assert its dominance. Hawkins suggests that much of the suffering we experience in life comes from the ego's attachment to force. The ego thrives in the lower levels of consciousness, where it seeks power through manipulation and control. However, true power, higher consciousness, comes from transcending the ego and aligning with something greater than ourselves. The path to higher consciousness, then, is about surrendering the ego and embracing truth, love, and compassion. Hawkins speaks of a spiritual journey in which we move beyond the illusions of separateness and into the realization of our interconnectedness with all life. This process requires letting go of fear, anger, and pride, and stepping into states of courage, acceptance, and ultimately, love. Lastly, let's talk about some practical applications of power versus force. So, what are the practical takeaways from power versus force? First, Hawkins teaches us to be mindful of the energy we are putting into the world. Are we acting from force, such as trying to control, manipulate, or coerce others? Or are we acting from power, aligned with truth and love, where our actions have a positive and uplifting effect on those around us? Second, the book encourages us to take personal responsibility for our state of consciousness. By raising our own level of consciousness, through practices like meditation, self-inquiry, and forgiveness, we can not only improve our lives, but also positively influence the world around us. Finally, power versus force invites us to question the sources of authority and power in our lives. Are we being led by leaders, ideas, or movements that operate from a place of force? Or are we aligned with those that operate from genuine power? This distinction is crucial for understanding the integrity and sustainability of the people and systems that influence us. In conclusion, Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins offers profound insights into the nature of human consciousness and how we engage with the world. By understanding the difference between power and force, we can make conscious choices that lead to more fulfilling lives. Power, grounded in truth and love, is lasting and transformative, while force is fleeting and ultimately destructive. Hawkins' map of consciousness and his exploration of the ego's role in our lives provide a powerful framework for personal and spiritual growth. As we raise our consciousness and align ourselves with higher truths, we not only uplift ourselves, but also contribute to the greater good of humanity.